Joel went here with more of a free rendering of the Hopi prophecy. We've looked at the situation rather briefly and not very precisely in a certain way from two different directions now. We looked at the Hopi oral history and its memories, and we've also looked at the research of Rudolf Steiner, which confirms the Hopi oral history in the story of Atlantis and the migrations from there. In the URLs at the end of this piece that also can be clicked on if you're working with YouTube, you'll find in the material that's descriptive of this, my descriptions, active links that you can go to those essays. Those essays are more carefully written than this oral stuff because I have time to do revisions, etc., etc., etc. I'm not exactly a public speaker of great erudition. Anyway, so we have this picture, which the Hopi oral history has somewhat of a memory, and we also have a picture that's given to us by Rudolf Steiner, which comes from what he describes as cosmic memory. And basically the story that we're getting so far is that Atlantis was real, and there was a destructive period, and people fled the land and migrated to the west and to the east out of Atlantis, which is supposedly sunk into what we call the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not going to go into the details of all of that, but there were these two migrations. In the Hopi oral history, we have this idea that they migrated all over the Americas, eventually coming to rest in the southwest on these three mesas. And their oral history has stories there. They talk about meeting the Creator himself, who met them when they arrived at different places, and they made agreements with him, and so on and so forth. And these are all very interesting things. And on my website you'll find a copy of From the Beginning of Time to the Day of Purification in English, and then someone sent me a copy which they said is in Spanish. I don't know Spanish, but it's up there if you want to read it in Spanish. Anyway, part of the Hopi oral history and the prophecy concerns the true white brother. And this, of course, is the elder brother in the story. The elder brother goes to the east. And at that point in the story, the Hopi, he kind of disappears. Where did he go? What did he do? What's he been up to? And I want to talk right now a little bit about that, because that's a very important element and deserves some care. One of the things that we're going to get into is idea of what will be called the evolution of consciousness. And that's the idea that the interior of the human being evolves in much more significant ways than we imagine. And that, for example, the interior or the soul life of the Hopi at the time of the Atlantean catastrophe is not the same as it is today. And in fact, if we go to the beginnings of natural science in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, in Europe we'll discover that that's actually a marker of a change of consciousness, a change from what a writer named Owen Barfield calls original participation to the onlooker separation. We'll get back to that. But I did want to say a little bit about that, because in understanding the movement from west into the Americas, and then move from Atlantis, and the movement east into Europe and beyond by the elder brother, one of the ways to look at this to help understand it is that we really had two different kinds of consciousness that were intended to develop. The Native Americans came to the West, and of course I mean all the Aboriginals of the Americas came to Atlantis came out of Atlantis to the West, and there they developed a form of consciousness in which they remained basically integrated with the natural world, and they saw in the natural world an expression of the divine, of the Great Spirit. And in all the different mythologies of native peoples, Aboriginal peoples in the Americas, you'll find some way in which this is expressed. Now, the elder brother, of which the Hopi know nothing except that he's going to come back at the time of crisis, which is, of course, what we're talking about here in these discussions on the songs of a true white brother. What happened to him? Well, Rudolf Steiner says that those that traveled to the east out of Atlantis ended up developing a mystery center in the Gobi Desert area, and from there they founded all the succeeding civilizations with which we are familiar that happened in that part of the world, and that left their remains in the culture of China and the culture of India and the Persian culture and the Egyptian culture and eventually the Greco-Roman civilization, and that within these peoples and these migrations and these streams, which the Hopi prophecy would call the elder brother, there was intended, you might say, a different kind of evolution of consciousness. Instead of remaining integrated with the idea with nature, the way that Native Americans remained integrated with nature, the elder brother's destiny involved developing a stronger ego consciousness, a stronger self-identity of individuality. And in order to do that, certain kinds of things had to happen, one of which was to separate out from nature. And if you look at this history of these civilizations from China and India and Persia and so forth, there's this gradual emergence of people from living intimately with nature to separating themselves out from it. And that this is was the task of the elder brother, was to develop a consciousness which was separated from nature. And of course this is what happened. We ultimately produced technology, and we live in great cities, and we hardly live in the natural world at all, although there's a yearning in people, a natural and understandable yearning in people to get back to those areas. But at the same time, it's simply not immediately on the table, although the yearning is there. And as I mentioned earlier with the discussion of the film Avatar, there's a memory of that, and an expression of that yearning of people to try and get back with nature. So we have then in the elder brother a development of different kinds of consciousness. And then what happens when the Europeans invade the Americas? You have a collision between these two kinds of consciousness, these two ways of being in the world, and they really can't understand each other in the beginning. Different individuals will have different degrees of empathy with those people that they meet, but by and large, the Western European developed consciousness, with its strong individuality and its interest in technology and its separation from nature, can't understand the Native American consciousness with its stronger sense of the significance of the group, of the tribe, and its more intimate relationship with nature. These two modes of consciousness come and clash. And of course this is what the prophecy is about at its core, which I mentioned when I talked about Avatar. It's about this clash, and it's about the resolution of this clash, and about the fact that within the inside of the European invasion is the true white brother, a brother who understands the spiritual in the same way that the Hopi understand the spiritual. Anyway, there we are.